Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the final part of our program symposium for today. I think if you've just walked in, we've had quite a bit of a journey in the past 2 days, right? We talked about experiential methods of production. We talked about mutual aid. We talked about the importance of like communal theft yesterday. Today we talked about kind of sound practices as amplification, resistance. We talked about collective ways of sound listening. We talked about being slow, intentional in the way we deal with technology. But the next session actually answers a fundamental question to me, especially looking at the state of the digital platforms around us, the state of the internet. And that question is, how did we get here, right? Because you go online and you're immediately, it's almost inevitable to be part of the psychological warfare imposed on you by the platforms. I, like many others of my generation and other generations, feel almost trapped by these platforms. And we need to take a closer look at not only the psychological impact, but the social impact. Because you now have a kind of fertile ground for far right movements. You have a fertile ground for things like ideologies that are like related to tradwife and manosphere influencers who exploit and capitalize on the same forces of fragility and vulnerability of young men that we actually want to kind of reclaim with this symposium. And the question is, how can we really escape these forces? Is there something that we can do together? When we resist and when we work on alternative solutions, what do we need to know about the different histories of the internet? So we do this in two ways in this talk. First, through understanding the different ways the internet has evolved, and particularly looking at the sexual histories of the internet to really understand it. And we're going to do this with artist Mindy Seu, who's going to be joining us remotely. And we're going to ask the question of how this intimacy, shaped by technology, has informed some of the most intimate parts of our lives. After that, we're going to be in conversation with Geert Lovink, who I think requires no introduction. But then we're going to talk about his latest work, Platform Brutality, and really how the toxic culture embedded in these platforms, how it pre-mediates our personal, social, and political lives. So let me very quickly introduce Mindy Seu, who really looks at the sexual history of the internet and how the internet's history is shaped by sexuality. She has a book with the name Sexual History of the Internet. It has two parts. First, um, she has a participatory lecture performance, and second is the actual book. It reveals pervasive and perverted origins of our digital tools. I'll speak less about it and let her introduce it. So, big round of applause for Mindy.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. I wish I could be there in person. I hear a bit of reverb from my end. Is there a way to maybe for now the audio? Anyone in tech chat could help as well. That would be great. But otherwise, um, I'm calling from a hotel in New York, hence the hotel art. But I'm very excited to kind of walk through this latest project just mentioned, A Sexual History of the Internet, focusing on how it kind of translated between the performance and the book, and how both reveal kind of the affordances of the platform, how to break or suggesting alternative uses for how we've been conditioned to use these platforms, and of course, their very sexualized origins as embodied technologies, as all technologies are. So I'm going to share my screen. This is the book. It is a little black book no larger than the size of your iPhone, extruded to 600 pages. It feels like the daughter of my first book, this big green encyclopedia called the Cyberfeminism Index. The Cyberfeminism Index was a pseudo-encyclopedic form that brought together thousands of different examples of online activism and net art from the past 3 decades, from when cyberfeminism was coined in 1991. So while one project feels like a project of accumulation, this very, very polyvocal history with a lot of themes, whether it's free libre open source software movements, online activism, wetware and biotech, etc. This new project, A Sexual History of the Internet, kind of isolates one of those strands to give it a closer look and turns that accumulation into a project that's more narrative. So imagine in this room, I asked you to pull out Instagram and go to a Finsta. Instagram is a tool that we use every day. We are conditioned to use it in particular ways, such as doom scrolling, rapidly clicking, trying to get as many likes and shares and interactions as possible, and it's become a platform of broadcast. But when you look at the interface a bit closely, you'll see that it's actually rather slow. So imagine we all pulled out our phones, we went to this Finsta, we clicked the same highlight at the same time, and then we just let it autoplay. It might look something like this. Chapter 1, you're holding a teledildonic. I was having drinks with Melanie Hoff, an artist and sex cyberneticist, and they casually referred to the phone as a sex toy. A click or swipe on the screen accesses desire. On our phones, we sext, we send nudes. Apps scan our environments for erotic encounters. Our phones respond to our touch. It's pressure sensitive. It vibrates. So you can see through these tick marks up at the top that it's essentially a timed slideshow that will continue moving forward forever. And when you aren't rapidly clicking, text slides are around 5 seconds, video slides are up to 1 minute, but it suddenly starts to become this durational format, and it also becomes an alternative publishing tool. So imagine you were looking at your phone on this Instagram account with 100 other people looking at their phone in the same room. This would be the premise of this performance, A Sexual History of the Internet. This was from our premiere at Pioneer Works in New York City. You start to feel very alone, but together, but it also starts to become a sort of incantation or mass. And a lot of people mentioned it feeling like some sort of religious experience, like going to Catholic Mass or church or something like this. All of these projects are really world-building projects. There's this great quote by André Breton that says, "To publish is to find comrades." And it really does start to feel like a calling card and attract all of these discursive dialogues with people who are connected to the same theme. Just a quick note to say we are continuing to tour this performance. If you want to go to the website, A Sexual History of the Internet, and look up events there. But I'm going to structure this very short talk kind of like the structure of the back of the book. This book is a history. It gathers anecdotes, artworks, and artifacts that reveal the pervasive and perverted origins of our digital tools. This book is a script. It documents a sexual history of the internet. And this book is a financial experiment, which I will explain at the end. When you buy this book, profit is redistributed to the people cited within the project as a new model of attribution. So this book is a history. I'm using, all of this content is on Arena because I like the references to be as open access as possible. I'm not going to walk through all of these slides, but these are all of the concrete examples that are listed in the project, and you're welcome to kind of dig around here on your own. I've highlighted a few examples to introduce today, but I very much welcome you to go to this Instagram account and go to this Arena channel. So what does it mean when we say a sexual history of the internet? We might start with concrete examples. When we think about the history of the internet and its relationship with sex, we start to see that it's really based on these ideas of extraction and or theft and humor. There's a bit of levity and immaturity in the types of jokes that kind of emerge. For example, the first node of ARPANET, the proto-internet, was on a Sigma 7 computer that ran the SEX operating system. And this was actually a portmanteau, a nickname given by one of the engineers for the SET-X operating system, which they shortened to SEX-OS. As people have been trying to navigate these online spaces, we also start to see examples like ASCII porn. This was captured through the Wayback Machine, so it says 2006 from this blog. But we can see that there's always been these depictions of nudity online. This goes as early as the late 1990s. But we also see it to arise in interfaces long before this, an example being teletext. Teletext was a way to send text and images to screen CRTs before we had the protocols that we use now. And Teletext Babes, which was documented by Martin Ploeg as well as Dragan Espenshede, we can see that it almost becomes these advertising channels. These were really trying to push you to physical meetups, but also trying to figure out what these might look like in digital spaces later on as the rise of personal websites began to emerge in the 90s. This is detailed quite nicely in writings by Sam Lee Cole, who's one of the founders of 404 Media. We also start to see it hit a more institutional zeitgeist. So this is one of the first computer-generated ASCII drawings by Leon Harmon and Ken Knowlton. They created this computer nude using ASCII, a bunch of different textual characters. They made it 12 feet long and printed it as a mural and put it in the wall of their boss's office at MIT as a joke. It later ended up in the walls of MoMA and got a feature in the New York Times. And it kind of suggests that while there are some innovations happening here, it's also largely based on this decommodification of women. I didn't pull up this image, but okay, I don't have to go to that. You might also be familiar with this film, The Mother of All Demos, by Douglas Engelbart from 1968. I'm not going to play this, but in it, he's introducing the innovations of the computer mouse, quote unquote, a new way to think. There's a great essay by Ali Na called The Fetish of the Click, which traces the evolution of the computer mouse from its origins as the light gun. So the light gun is what it sounds. It was a gun-like shape that transmitted lasers, and it was a way to test out or simulate these defense mechanics as a military defense tool. This then segued to the light pen, which we see as pretty similar to a stylus. Both of them had quite phallic shapes and were really born as mechanics of a military-industrial complex. And then as it shifted to the computer mouse, Ali Na traces this evolution from a very phallic militaristic shape to perhaps a more mainstream and yonic shape, or looking like a vulva. You have a computer mouse with two distinct halves. It's flat and cup-sized. There's a central scrolling wheel, which, if you look at the vulva, also then starts to mimic the location of a clitoris. This might also suggest why a very early cyberfeminist group, VNS Matrix, has a manifesto in which they describe the clitoris as the direct line to the matrix, to really think about these cold, sterile, metal impressions that we have of these digital landscapes is actually quite slimy and embodied and built into nature and the earth. Some other concrete examples in the book are situated within an art historical context, one of which is this image of Hannah Baer. So Hannah Baer is a writer and artist based in New York. She fed this image of herself into a deepfake generator, and it fed back this blurry image that she was unable to see because her generated nudity was blocked by a paywall.
No.
In this essay for the Art Forum feature, Hannah also walks through her being a trans woman, not having any perceived surgeries of this sort, and how it's unable to decipher and continues to create the image meme, which is this idea of a woman with very specific genitalia. It's also unable to distinguish certain types of body parts. So here we can also see its inability to remove this top that she's wearing. We also have figures like Mistress Harley. Mistress Harley is a dominatrix, formerly an IT professional, and they coined the term tech dom. They're described as a sex worker and policed as a sex worker. They're unable to use these major credit cards. They're unable to use Stripe. I'm not sure of the rules in Amsterdam, but there are very strict rules of quote-unquote obscenity in US legislation. But she doesn't actually participate in sex as we know it. She doesn't do in-person meetup. She's never nude online. She doesn't do any camming. But she instead gets remote access to her submissives' computers. She can control their invisible files, their online accounts, their bank accounts. She can move their mouse. And it's not so dissimilar from when you're having trouble with Adobe and they can grant a remote access to your machine to help navigate your computer from afar. A lot of these examples kind of point to this term coined by Liara Rue called pussy capital in eFlux. So pussy capital is essentially this idea of using women and women's labor as a way to build a market, obfuscate it, and then remove it. So an example of that is Patreon. Patreon is now a subscription-based content creation platform. At the time, it was primarily used for getting subscriptions to sexual content. It was very, very active in that space. And then once it kind of hit the mainstream and became known as a podcasting platform, it removed all of the sex work from this sex workers from this platform, and then kind of rebranded to be something a bit more PG. Just for the sake of time, I'm going to move through this a bit faster. So again, there's plenty of more examples in here that you're welcome to use. This book is also a script. It really makes me wonder, at this point, a cyborgian aesthetic is passé. We all know that we are attached to our machines, that we live in environments that are physical and digital. But I think examining the conditioned uses of these tools and probably alternative pathways is an important distinction of trying to use a tool while simultaneously criticize it. We see this kind of discussion happening quite often with artists who are using new technologies, like this Holly Herndon describes this phenomenon with her use of AI. I'm looking at the time and I think we're actually way later, so I'm going to fast forward a bit. I'll actually just click through so you can get a sense of some of our publishing slides. Or maybe it's going to load too long, but I just wanted to talk about the financial experiment. This is part of a much larger talk, so you're welcome to look at some of our references of this translation process between performance and print. But first, or last, let's talk about the financial experiment. The first page of the book says, when you buy this book, profit will be redistributed to every person cited within. It is a new model of attribution. This is actually a typo. It's not every person. It's the people that opted into the experiment. And I'll explain what that means in a second. The standard profit split for publishing is roughly 90% publisher, 10% author. And there's a reason why publishers take this large amount. They're often fronting costs for production. They are also dealing with warehousing, shipping, connecting you to a distributor, etc. But still, we wanted to kind of conceive of a self-publishing model that might try to reconfigure what this format looks like. So we created a different profit split for a sexual history of the internet. 10% goes to our sales platform, MetaLabel. 60% goes to the team, all those people listed on that slide before. And 30% we call the citation pool. The citation pool basically means, of the 46 people who were cited within this project, we explained the financial experiment to all of them, or as many people as possible. 27 of those people opted in. 4 opted out, but explicitly asked us to reallocate their share back into the group. 6 didn't reply, 5 are not living, and 4 are unreachable. So of these 27 people who opted in, they'll make around 20 cents per book, and if all copies sell out, we're very close to selling out, each person cited will earn around $850. And if we ever do reprints, they'll continue to receive splits in perpetuity. And these are all the people cited within the project. When we first announced this experiment, it was generally met with a lot of enthusiasm and curiosity, but there were a few comments that were talking about how this is the nth degree of late capitalism and how we are commodifying knowledge and how that's antithetical to the distribution of knowledge. But it made me think of this distinction between different definitions of freedom or of free. And this was specified during the beginning of the open source software movement. You might have heard this famous quote, "Free as in speech, not free as in beer." Free as in beer refers to gratis versus libre, these two definitions of free. Gratis is about a quantity. It's $0, so this beer is $0. Libre is about a freedom that's about universal access, like universal access to knowledge, right? People have an inalienable right to access these things. But of course, in the open source software movement, we also weren't asking people to make work for free. We were talking about it being an open access movement that people can then access, manipulate, create versions of their own. There were different systems of maintenance in play, and it was also trying to figure out a more distributed method of how to fundraise for these projects, which were largely untenable because of some of the open access, and the long-term maintenance was very hard to implement. So it makes me consider this when we think about an experiment like this. For me, it feels like an example of how even a small artist project might serve as a model or as a suggestion for how we might choose to redistribute our funding. If you're interested in very specific numbers and etc., you can go to this link on MetaLabel, which we actually walk through how much it costs to print, what the profit margins are, etc., and how much each person explicitly gets. But with that, I'm going to stop there. And thank you so much for your time.
Can you hear me? Hello?
Yes,
Yes.
I can.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Mindy, for kind of walking us through the work that you kind of created, and kind of drawing parallels between the history of the internet and also the sexual history that kind of came out of it. My question here is more about how can we reclaim these kind of histories, and how important is it for us to reclaim? Because you've mentioned that the platforms are actively fighting these histories that brought them to life.
This question of reclamation is interesting because it's trying to map the center. So, and the center is a very specific bounds. These histories have been around alongside all of these other mainstream ones, and they've been widely understood for specific communities. And I think it's trying to understand if you're trying to make something mainstream, or if you're trying to actually speak to a specific group or audience, which is why we have all of these parallel versions of these histories. Of course, as I'm sure this audience understands, the histories that we are often taught are just the histories of the victors. But trying to kind of isolate a specific framework for a community can actually be helpful in understanding who you're trying to communicate with and cater information towards. So the reclaiming of these tools, I like kind of positioning these histories with artist examples, because artists historically have used their work to draw attention to these alternative pathways and to break rules in the process of creating the work.
I think then I would like to ask you a little bit about the process of engaging these artists to create an index of histories, right? Because you're not rewriting it yourself. You're not. We're kind of moving away from this kind of I don't know, singular genius who's reconsidering or revising the history. So how is the process for you, and what kind of emerged also from contacting all these people, and also the experiment is something that we can talk about a bit more.
Yeah. Many feminist scholars will describe, when asked what is the greatest feminist technology, they will say the citation. The citation is an incredible technology because it's a scaffolding structure, it's an attribution structure for knowledge production, and it, in its core, talks about how nothing is created in isolation, and that we should talk about the people who created the pedestal rather than the person on it. It also shows that these histories are extremely polyvocal. So while we can talk about some of the big historical or social movements, if you actually go down to an anthropological perspective, you will start to find these individual stories in the independent people who were part of the actual social movement.
I think I really find it quite. There is this kind of clean slate ideology with a lot of, like, also especially AI researchers, where they go, this is the end of the internet, this is the end of history, this is the start of something new. And I think continuity, as you say, becomes the most logical, but maybe sometimes the most radical thing is to say work has already been done. We just need to continue. Uh, do we have time for a question from the audience? Not sure. I think we will take a couple. Does anyone have a question for Mindy? Going once, going twice. All right. I have a question for you. Um, I think for me as a maybe speculative exercise, because we have the option now as platforms in which we have to, I don't know, enact desire. We're a little bit kind of dependent on them. So what does it look like to design a digital space where desire can coexist without being weaponized or commodified? Do we have examples of that somewhere, or what would it take to create such a space?
Interesting. So platforms by nature are built off of desire. So you're asking about how we can actually remove desire itself from commodity. And commodity means the manipulation or the isolation of these units in order to make them saleable. So maybe at a glance, it's something that isn't saleable, but that
Yeah.
almost seems too simple.
Yeah.
I think that when you are a woman growing up online, you inherently learn that you are a performer. And it kind of trains you to behave in certain ways, whether that's passive or active. So it's much more subliminal than only selling a specific thing.
Yeah.
Especially in these markets where it's not this one-to-one, but rather an ecosystem of all of these targets. I think it must come back to some sort of platform that feels insular and for a specific community. I also wonder if platform is the wrong description for this, because I feel like as we find all of these technological problems, our instinct is to come up with a technological solution, when that's also to be at odds here. So I don't actually know what a non-commodified desire platform looks like, but if I were to brainstorm this more, it's likely not going to be online.
I mean, it could be an oxymoron, right? It could be that it cannot exist. It could be that the master's tool cannot destroy the master's house, because to make something truly situated, it cannot be a mass produced tool, right? It has to be maybe adjacent somehow.
Yeah, there's a certain adjacency, and maybe that goes back to trying to pinpoint the center or redefine like what the specific audience or community for something might be.
Yeah. I think maybe my last question is really about, I think also the talk that we had before, a lot of the imperatives about slowness really invites us a little bit to go back, right? Is to abandon something that we have right now and to really go back to an earlier technology, is to really understand. And I still wonder, without steering too much towards like techno optimism, if we can still employ technology, maybe not platforms, into furthering or really enacting the joy of like sexuality and sexual performance without co-option. And I think maybe it is a similar question, but is there hope?
I certainly think there's hope. I think I am not a Luddite by any means. I tend to be a quite early adopter. And I think
Yeah.
that there's all of these avenues for uh, creating technology and tools in alternative ways. I think the harder thing here is not individual adoption of all of this, but rather the maintenance. It's
Yeah.
like the long-term scale that I think people are trying to reconsider here, because the resource allocation is so stilted. So I wonder if this is what the previous person was referring to more by these ideas of slowness. Um, there's this organizer and scholar named H. Ray Brown who
Yeah.
this term called emergent strategy, which is inherently nonlinear and cyclical as this kind of growing spiral. And even Anna Singh writes about in their mushroom book, while these quotations of of tech CEOs is to move fast and break things. You can
Mm-hmm.
actually just uh, look around rather than looking ahead. There's such a fixation on the future, and it's like trying to create like some sort of utopic principles that we can apply to the present rather than a speculative utopia that no one can agree on.
Yeah. No, I think it's we were just mentioning Adrienne Marie Brown in the previous session, so I think we
I agree.
have done a beautiful full cycle. I think in the interest of time, I would like to thank you a lot for your
Great.
generosity, for the well thought out answers, and I think it's safe to say you've left the audience speechless. So thanks a lot. Thanks a lot. Big round of applause. Speaking of platforms, who here remembers the term Zoom fatigue? So I think this is maybe a good introduction into the kind of work that is produced by Geert, where he really looks at psychological states shaped by the infrastructure of big tech. One of it is platform nihilism, another is Zoom fatigue, to the coping mechanisms endured 24/7 by the rhythms of social media. So this is quite timely, and I think it also touches on the lived experience of almost everybody in this room, which actually causes it more and more to be put into question, into critical questioning, and to really understand that this comes from a group of people in Silicon Valley who have a certain narrative relating to soft power that they have. And that kind of illusion is beginning to erode very quickly. Digital platforms now appear to be entering in this more openly antagonistic phase, from subtle forms of behavioral influence to what he describes as infrastructural violence. Geert Lovink is a Dutch media theorist, internet critic, and author. His work examines the social, political, and psychological impacts of the digital platforms and network cultures. His recent books include Sad by Design, Stuck on the Platform, and platform brutality, which you'll talk about. Big round of applause to Geert.
Um, Good afternoon, everyone. It's an honor to be here. Thanks so much for Fiber for inviting me here in my hometown where I was born. So that's a special thing for me. Before I will start with going into the book and the topic of platform brutality, there's something urgent I need to discuss, and that is the transition that my center, the Institute of Network Culture, is currently going through. After more than 22 years based at the Hogeschool Amsterdam, the Polytech here in this city, due to my mandatory retirement soon, we will move on and become a cultural organization, an NGO. And so that's a very big step for us. Basically, we go back to €0 and zero staff and start from scratch. So that's a very exciting thing, but it's also important for you to know, because yeah, we will work with all of you, and we want to continue, but also change. We're not just focused on the legacy, but we're very much focused on the future, because the last couple of years have been very exciting. So we're really in the middle of so much. Here, I've quickly mentioned a few things. In the center of it all is Girl Theory, led by Mela Mikos, who's here with us today. This is a whole field of new inquiries and yeah, challenging practices that we theorize. but also want to take forward. Um, yeah. One of the surprising things that happened over the past couple of years is that suddenly we had a Spanish website in our midst. So we're not just in English or Dutch, but yeah, the Spanish is really important here, and this is an exciting travelogue of one of our researchers going through the whole Latin American um, landscape that is really at the forefront of what we here in Europe call digital sovereignty. Um, these are the two last publications that just came out a couple of weeks ago. On the left, you see a reader that's really bringing together a lot of the Gen Z um, investigations. Similar with the one on the right, which is of course, technical media investigating, the media activist strategies of the past couple of years. This is the first project that we can already announce for the time after the Havia, which is a collaboration with Transmediale in Berlin. But what is also very important is that we continue to do a lot of live streaming. The live streaming has happened over the past couple of years, primarily led by Ukraine TV, working out of Krakow and then spreading. We're very excited to see that this has now become a network. We're the Institute of Network Coaches after all. It's called the StreamArt Network. Here you see the latest one a couple of weeks ago, somewhere in Italy, as you can see. A very classic setup. This one was also very special during the victory night of the elections in Budapest. And so we have a very active node at the intermedia department. For us, social media alternatives, have been a topic since 2010 when we started the Unlike Us network. Of course, that can be very frustrating, realizing that we made so little progress over the past 15 years. On the other hand, there's also this wonderful thing happening, organized by Setup in Utrecht, which I think has a wonderful future to historicize the social media experience of us all. So instead of only critiquing it, to ritualize, so to say, and celebrate the Exodus, in a different way. Because a lot of the activist strategies of the last 15 years, I can tell you, have not yet worked, right? And so here, this is the whole kind of specter already, with all the apps and things, all the alternatives are all out there, right? We know it, but as you could see, even Mindy is very much, acting strictly within, the paradigm of the big US tech platforms, right? And we want to make a difference. And of course, this week was an important week in the Netherlands because for the first time there was a victory. The DGID will not be sold to an American company, which I think, is after so many defeats, especially lately, this was a very important moment for us in this long, let's say, process of building the Eurostack. And the Institute of Network Culture has always seen itself as a part of this. This is maybe very much, led by Francesca Abria. It's very much top-down, policy-focused really faced on the Brussels lobby, but nonetheless, maybe we believe that it should be done more top down. Um, Here this is a picture from one of the early attempts led by De Waag, to create this. De Waag is playing an important role in this movement, and we really, really hope also with this initiative, maybe you've heard about it, please become a member of the Firewall led by Erik Smit from Follow the Money, right? So that we can start to make a difference, because a lot of people are actually looking at us, looking at the scene, also the scene of fiber, right? We have to act and we have to make a difference. Now is the time to do it. Okay. I want to stop there with the brief update, and now go to this latest book, Platform Brutality, which is about the violent turn. And I have to say, I was writing this book, and it took a lot of energy and consideration to really face the brutality and violence of it, and to name it, and to give the book this title, which really I didn't want, because I strongly believed, in all the um, other strategies, but we have come to this point, and we have to face it, maybe in a still in a very I don't know if it's naive way, a psychoanalytic way. First analysis, diagnosis, and then therapy and solutions. But we need to face where we are, right? Okay, and the major inspiration for me was this book, written in 2020 by the African philosopher Achille Mbembe, who has really, put this, these concepts and this realization to the term. Okay, I would like to ask to switch now to the presentation. Yep, all right. And so I will now read some parts of the book, but also it's also an update, because things are going so fast that I had to update my own book constantly, and so I decided that this was not going to be a shame, but it was a necessity. So this is a free interpretation of the book. The stagnation of the platform has brought us back to the military origin of the internet. What happens when mindless and distracted users remain stuck with no end in sight? The destruction of attention starts to hurt, eventually turning into structural violence. In the early days, the internet's power was still situated inside networks of communities. Websites were shops or squares, not integral facilitators. In the late 90s, the term e-commerce already meant that I could facilitate your trade and not just sell my own stuff. After the dot-com crash, the emphasis shifted from access and participation to revenue. A decade later, all the platform's struggles were lost. The platform subsumed the internet and transformed it into a meta market aimed to optimize the extraction of centralized data flows. Technopedia defines the platform in cold terms. I quote, as the foundation upon which software applications operate and interact with each other and underlying hardware. Unlike the website or the blog, the platform is a horizontal place, platform. Yeah, platform. It's a horizontal place where users are not merely guests or readers who contribute, but constitute the core of the business proposition. The user is the message. According to Webster, decentralized network paradigms fall apart and centralization takes command. The platform is not merely a website amongst many, it is a meta website, a super node that not just connects many to many, but functions as the beginning and end point of the online experience. Digital platforms allow different hardware and software to interact via communication platforms and protocols and facilitate an infinite number of users. It's the almost cost-free scalability that facilitates hypergrowth in a short time. When platformization is fueled by venture capital, a monopoly status can be reached almost overnight, causing a lock-in effect for the user masses. Competition is not happening between platforms, but happens on the platform itself. From here, the smooth and frictionless platform starts to cause dependency, anxiety, and depression. In recent years, the generic term platform capitalism has thus been mutated into techno-feudalism. And in the book, I have a special chapter just on the whole techno-feudalism debate of the last few years. Platforms are the unseen and behave like innocent bystanders, pretending never to be responsible for anything. They were intended for users to look straight through them and not notice the design anymore, thanks to mundane and smooth functionality. Transparency makes it hard to see platforms as distinct objects. Platforms do not shine, to put it in the words of the late Dutch architecture theorist Maurice Niel. Swiping the screen, the user stumbles on a precise meme. Oh, the cares of man, how much of everything is futile. Am I bored and losing direction in life? Or am I just optimizing lost time? Mm-hmm. Despite the urgency of the platform question, the problem cannot be addressed head-on. Until very recently, invisible facilitators of platforms appeared as pure ideology. Not only did leading players quickly become too large to handle, platforms turned out to dissolve into thin air, hiding inside the technical stack, becoming an ecology, an unaccountable sphere, much like the air we breathe and do not notice. Both users and experts find it hard to explain where platforms begin and end. As politicians are unwilling and incapable of breaking up big tech, the internal hypergrowth mechanism keeps generating new market behemoth. The platform condition is classified as intolerable, unlivable, uncurable, and unbearable. There's disgust translating into the disdain for the topic. A cynical reason emerges. Everyone agrees on the untenable power of the platform, yet no one is willing to leave. Mentally speaking, users have been proven incapable of facing the information. Glued to the phone, users do not even notice they're logged in. In a matter of seconds, they have liked this, purchased that, responded with an emoji, hovering over the apps. The mindless online present has turned subconscious. The purpose of the platform is to do what it does. No higher goal or problem needs to be resolved. Once you've created a profile and clicked on something, the endless scroll takes over. From the moment you signed up, the platform presents itself as a self-evident totality, a service that was, is, and always will be, ready to lure you into the next transaction. Now that you're part of the flow, any attention hook can pull you away. There's no longer the tiring obligation to build one's own social network. Just start swiping and the suggestions will appear automatically for your screen only. As there are neither signs of a deeper understanding of platform nor of a move to overcome this techno-social formation, the online billions are stuck. There is no more intelligence on the fringes. Instead, it is more productive to see the platform as an allegory. The software is so powerful because it is a personal experience based on your very own belief system. Users are barely able to express underlying ideas. Instead, we forget our obligations and dive into the screen full of intriguing characters and disturbing, strange, cute videos that must be engaged with. The platform as allegory is a story we tell ourselves in negotiation with our superego to get more phone time in exchange. And now I switch to the violent part. Yeah. The term platform brutality was instigated, as I said, by readings of Achille Mbembe book Brutalism, known as the 1950s rough concrete architecture style. Mbembe presents brutalism as what he calls a thought image that can be seen as not a not so elegant synonym for capitalism. Here, the emphasis shifts from extraction and profit as such to actual violence via a state of seemingly random, destructive fantasies. And all these memes you see here, yeah, are part of that, of course. Mbembe, I quote here, brutalism, he says, is the name given to this gigantic process of eviction and evacuation, as well as a draining of vessels and emptying of organic substances. This results, what he calls, into naturalizing social war. The digital is no longer a parallel world, but intrinsic part of a war presented as, I quote again, human existence's highest manifestation. According to this line of thinking, the truth of life resides in its destructive force. The thesis here is that instead of being portrayed as a machine of endless facilitation, the internet has hit a historic wall, and in response reacts with an inner destructive energy. Right? So the growth phase of endless facilitation, yeah, of just growing endlessly, has hit this wall, and suddenly the energy starts to go inward, and that's what we are confronted with. As planetary machines in a murderously frenzied state, platforms are at full capacity at the moment. Loaded up with potentiality, the platform used to present itself as a never-ending thin layer on which the techno-social is acting itself out. But this image can no longer be maintained. And this is, let's say, the turn, right? The violent turn in internet culture. As a vast plane lacking depth, the platform now facilitates a never-ending one-dimensional trip that is impossible to quit. As lost subjects endlessly toil around inside it, digital reason has a hard time explaining the matter. The platform logic views the world, and I cite again, as an immense reservoir from which to draw. However, in this next brutalist stage, the platform is no longer new, let alone sexy. So that's maybe an interesting reference. You know, there's a history of the internet that we just saw in Mindy's presentation, but it may be that this history has come to an end. There's so much despair and distrust, but users are locked in and too tired to leave. The brutal turn of the platform logic is experienced as an unpleasant wake-up call. Possibilities and routines are suddenly interrupted. What do you want? The dude asks in this meme. Implosion or explosion? Italian theorist Franco Berardi calls this next stage, quote, a chaotic war of all against all, driven by dementia and the automation of linguistic behavior, existential path and expectations. Chaos and the automation develop and grow into a violent, symbiotic relationship. When the data grab hampers, structural violence hits the surface. Platform brutality is turning into real physical violence. The issue here is to prove in detail how the platform is directly involved in acts of violence, not merely reporting or facilitating, but driving it. This development might move in stages from the often voluntary creation of a profile via identification, separation, incarceration, and deportation to ultimately extermination. And I have a chapter in my book, Sad by Design, in which I already describe all these different steps. And we know that the privacy advocates of often well-meaning liberals and libertarians right, often limit their critique to this first phase, namely the phase of identification, right? But after identification, unfortunately, the other stages are happening in which groups are identified, concentrated, separated, and ultimately deleted, as I call it. Intimidation of large groups is definitely stage 2. We do not immediately have to think of the use of gospel AI by the Israeli army in the flattening of Gaza, even though the example is a textbook example of technological violence. And this technological violence is the term I'm already developed in Set by Design. And so the platform brutality starts with staging acts of banality. And the memes you see here are this act of banality, right? Instigated by celebrities, influencers, oligarchs, and other state officials. This is how we are made ready to confront symbolic, technological, and ultimately real violence. So an example of today's abstract violence is the strategy of mass deletion. And here I will stop. This is the last part, and it's about Doge, right? So I have worked a bit on the example of Doge because, yeah, it's a textbook example of mass deletion as a very, very cruel and abstract technological form of violence. Yeah, I'd like to remind everyone that, in a few weeks' time, 300,000 people in the US lost their jobs just because they were deleted. Their databases, everything was deleted, right? So mass deletion is a very, very important first step, and one we should understand as a cultural technique, right? A cultural technique of digital erasure, which is next level and goes beyond, let's say, censorship or budget cuts. Right? To silence or hurt is one, but to kill the file is another. Blotting or blacking out can still be read as a correction. Editing should be seen as an improvement. Do good forces love to clean up and restore order? Of course. One needs crucial access to data to cross out identities and related sources indefinitely. And once in, the devastation can occur. By the way, this act presumes that the reinstallment of backups will be prevented, right? Because obviously there are backups, right? But the deletion has to be done in such a way that the system itself cannot reinstall backups. Deletion of data and removing of the hardware once is not enough. The destruction needs to be final and devastating. According to the perpetrators, the victims need to be anonymized and disappear for good. This is why giving back names and faces of victims, which you can see here in the Weesperstraat when you go to the Holocaust Memorial. It's a very, very important memorial, very important for me as well. But there you can see the names of the Dutch Holocaust victims. And this is a very, very important act, again, that I also described in this previous chapter on technological violence. Because essentially the Holocaust, especially in the Netherlands, was an act of administrative technological violence. We should not forget that, with a high complicity task of the Doge team, given by Musk, was to change software and interfaces inside the federal payment system of the United States. The method was shock mass ring fires. Yeah? So mass firings were seen as shock, as part of a shock therapy. Of course, described very well early on by Naomi Klein in her book. The methods were copied from Elon Musk's raid on his own Twitter offices. Maybe you remember back in October 2022, after he purchased the company. Right, he moved in and erased everything, which meant that all people who worked at Twitter could no longer access anything. So, of course, we know that Doge eventually failed to reach its official efficiency objectives. While Doge continued its techno-sadist strategies, US public debt started to increase instead of decrease. Right? And so officially they failed in their task. To to cut 1 or 2 trillion. I don't know what their aims were. And now I come to an end. Along the lines of Hannah Arendt's book on violence, technological violence in the Doge style can be interpreted as signs that Silicon Valley's power is waning. Right? This is a very important and hopeful end. Very important. As Hannah Arendt writes, I quote, power and violence are opposites. Violence appears, in her definition, where power is in jeopardy. Violence can destroy power. It's incapable of creating it. So following her argument, we could say that violence is not a display of tech power, but arises from its moment of impotence. Big tech hegemony is evaporating as we speak into thin air when their soft power no longer works. We see platforms moving from optimization and openly committing to forms of structural violence. The Trump-Musk-Doge saga exemplifies that the Californian ideology, once defined by Richard Barbrook and Andy Cameron, and uncontested for 3 long decades, has lost its hegemony, and it's showing its brutal side. Doge and Palantir stand for the transition to Californian violence. We delete you is going to be the next battle cry in the years to come. Thank you very much.
Geert, thank you so much. We have time for one question.
Sure.
So let's have a seat. Move to this couch a little bit. Come through. Maybe you can be here. I mean, I have. First of all, I want to acknowledge on the first part of your presentation, INC. I think when I moved to Amsterdam 10 years ago as a young researcher, I want to acknowledge how much the INC meant to me in terms of like showing possibilities in it was almost like intellectual, tender love and care for someone who's quite lost. Yes. I want to acknowledge this, and I want to implore everybody to support when they could.
Thank you
in
so
the new
much
page.
For your kind words.
Yeah, thank you so much, Geert.
Me.
My first question is, and maybe my only one, is a bit more grim. You talk in the book a little bit more about the role of the user, right?
Yeah.
Because we're not getting anything from governance. From the platforms are getting progressively more brutal, but you say that the user is not a subject anymore, right?
Yeah.
Which means they have responsibility. What is that responsibility that you are alluding to?
Yeah. Um, I would like to warn for too much expectations on the level of the change of individual behavior,
Mm.
right? So we are not talking about, let's say, a consumer movement here, right? Uh, it is it will have to be something else. Originally, of course, I thought about something like what in all my decades of being an activist and going through these changes that social movements go through,
Yeah.
right? And yeah, there is always the hope that a movement, no matter how long it took to take off, that it would reach a critical mass, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and of course, yeah, we wouldn't know, and yeah, there is no science of that, how to come to that point. And in this case, when we're talking about an organized exodus of the big tech social media platforms, this is what needs to happen. Now, I don't believe, maybe after working on this for 15 years, that it will necessarily come from inside the users, right?
Mm.
The desolate state is such that maybe this is not. So, unfortunately, the only thing that can happen, and that's what we see around us today, is that much larger historical forces
Yeah.
will instigate this. So instead of it coming from inside the user, the consumer, whatever the subject,
Yeah.
um, we will only, you know, take action collectively because we're forced to.
So I mean I think to me is also like a researcher, you're first excited by the possibility of organized grassroots struggle,
Yeah.
then currently disenchanted.
Yes.
But then I think what you're kind of warning, or you're kind of also mentioning, is that we just almost have to wait. Is that the next course of action, right?
No, me as an activist,
We can't say that, right?
I will never
But
say.
a
I, I
grassroots
know
thing is not going to happen, no?
objectively yes,
Yeah.
but I cannot
Okay.
say this because I don't believe waiting. Let's call it conspiring. Let's
Okay. Okay.
let's yeah, because yeah, maybe it's not going to happen yet, you know, in society at large. But yeah, as I said, I'm very inspired by the Facebook Museum, and I
Yeah.
believe that such artistic strategies, this is the way to go. Yeah, and also maybe to learn,
Yeah.
and that's why there is something like Fiber. That's why we have these festivals, because we discuss things, we discuss artistic strategies,
Yeah.
and we also learn a thing or two about what may and may not work.
Geert, I think this is what I was maybe looking for. I think there's a discomfort. I think that I do feel when we talk about this, because a part of your conversation is really about accepting that it's pretty bad. It is pretty brutal. That we need to accept it. We need to stop decorating it. We need to stop saying that all these movements that we've been creating for 15 years have reached critical mass. But again, now there's a glimmer of hope. I don't want to leave the audience maybe with
For
this bitter
sure,
feeling. There
yeah.
is a glimmer
And
of
the
hope.
hope is, of course, that also connecting to the previous session,
Yeah,
that um, the slowness will uh, teach us that we need to communicate,
yeah,
but this communication means are or should be seen as tools,
Yes.
as tools that we use and put away. And that last part is not possible anymore. And that's what we should regain.
Beautiful, beautiful. The slowness will teach us. I think I have to end it here.
Thank
thank
you
you
very
so
much.
much, Geert. Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you for joining us
No,
and being here.